I think the protests that you're seeing, I'm sure it includes some naive people, but there are a lot of people who know exactly what they're saying. They're lining up with ISIS, with Al-Qaeda, with these murderers, with these baby birders, with these rapists, and with these mutilators, these head choppers.
Well, just some thoughts back reflecting on October 7th and the horror of that day from Douglas Murray, and you heard the Israeli Prime Minister there as this protest goes on in New York. Meantime, there's some journalists. Washington Post notes hundreds of journalists signed a letter protesting coverage of Israel. Most strikingly, the letter argues that journalists should use words like apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide to describe Israel's treatment of Palestinians. Quote, my hope for this letter is to push back on the culture of fear around this issue, says Abdullah Fayed, 2022 Pulitzer Prize finalist and former editorial board member at the Boston Globe, who signed the letter, and to make decision makers and reporters and editors think twice about the language that they use. With that, let's bring in our panel, Washington Post columnist Mark Thiessen, Leslie Marshall, Democratic strategist, and Josh Kraushaar, a Fox News radio political analyst. Mark, what about that letter and the words people use, apartheid, genocide, and as Douglas Murray said, forgetting about October 7th?
Well, first of all, there's no apartheid either in Israel or in Gaza. Gaza has been governed by the elected leaders of the Palestinian people who chose Hamas to be their leaders, and their elected leaders decided to launch an attack on Israel on October 7th and slaughter 1,400 innocent people. And Israel's now responding. So, you know, the idea that somehow the media has been biased in Israel's favor is kind of laughable. This is if anything, the opposite is the case. They've been taking Hamas propaganda about casualties and other things like that. And Israel needs to go. If we want to have peace in this region, they've got to destroy Hamas.
Leslie?
So much to unpack here. Love you, Mark, but going to completely disagree. I don't know if the word apartheid is appropriate, but definitely when you control the comings and goings of another individual, an entire population. You talk about voting. Let's look at the statistics. Statistically, less than half the population of voting age, less than half of that voted, less than half of that voted for Hamas. They actually didn't even win the election. They just took power. Water, electricity supplied by Israel. 60, according to Israeli sources, Hamas have been killed. Over 4,000, according to UN and the doctors, not just the Palestinians or Hamas giving those figures. Over 4,000 children who have been killed, over 1,200 still missing, and perhaps among the rubble. Those children are not being bombed by Hamas.
They're being bombed because Hamas is keeping them as human shields, Leslie. Hamas is keeping them as human shields. Israel does not target children on purpose.
To use them as human shields is to hold them up. Israel says that they're looking for the tunnels. All of the doctors have said that there are no tunnels under Shifa Hospital. They've been beneath the hospital. There are people hiding for shelter.
They're hiding weapons in
below the
schools. They're hiding weapons in hospitals. They're hiding weapons in mosques. They're taking hostages and using them as human shields. Israel does not intentionally target civilians. If anything, they send leaflets to warn them to get out of the way. They create humanitarian corridors to let them leave. Hamas goes and slaughters children and slices their heads off in their homes. This is not moral equivalence.
Mark, where do the people go after the leaflets are dropped? That's a reality, and that's from humanitarian sources on the ground, not just from the United States, but other countries as well.
From going?
Where do they go within
Hamas,
Gaza? Gaza
Egypt?
is arguably two DCs, Washington DCs together, and we're taking Josh's time and Brett's time entirely. So I'm
that's okay. I wanted to let you go because you were kind of bouncing back and forth, and those are the arguments that are made on both sides of this issue. I want to once again we go back into the archives and get something from our late colleague Charles Krauthammer about Israel, and he said many things that really factor in today. Take a listen. And they're not asking that today either. Josh, you heard the Israeli Prime Minister on this show yesterday, kind of bending over backwards, it seemed, to point out what they're trying to do to help civilians in Gaza and to make this as quick as possible. Obviously, to Leslie's point, it's not that quick, and it is going to get uglier before it gets finished.
Yeah, well, Israel is fighting a war for its very survival. I mean, they can't survive with a terrorist state after, with Hamas on its border, continuing to threaten innocent civilians. And the butchery and the slaughter that took place on October 7th is unacceptable for any democracy. And self-defense is a well-defined principle. And the United States has a long history in recent years of going after ISIS, of going after Al-Qaeda. And there's been civilian casualties, but they've never gotten the same backlash, because I think there's a worldwide acknowledgement that you're allowed to fight against terrorists and fight against Hamas, which is a United States designated terrorist organization. I think it's interesting, sort of on the ground, Israel seems to be doing a lot better than some of the naysayers and some of the skeptics believed at the beginning of the operation. You're seeing them close in on some of the terrorist infrastructure from Hamas. There's a lot of fierce fighting taking place this evening close to the central headquarters of Hamas near that Al-Shifa hospital. So Israel is actually, there's been a lot of clearly denunciations from certain. There's been a lot of international pressure, but the White House has given Israel the time it's needed to take out a sophisticated tunneling from Hamas, and Israel has done quite a good job. I think a lot of critical of how bloody an operation actually turned out to be a little bit better, I think, than most Israelis expected.
Well, listen, it's continuing every day. We're following it every day, and we will continue to. Senator Manchin, we talked about retiring, considering a third-party run. Wall Street Journal writes it this way: Democratic Senator Joe Manchin won't run for re-election in West Virginia. A group is formed to urge retiring Republican Senator Mitt Romney from Utah, also 76, and Manchin to run for president and vice president, respectively, as a unity ticket next year, backed by no labels. The draft Romney-Manchin committee plans to make a formal announcement next week, according to members of the effort. We're back with the panel. Josh, is that going to fly?
Well, look, on one hand, Nikki Haley is right that, the prospect of a Trump-Biden rematch pits two of the most unpopular politicians against each other. And in that environment, there's going to be room for at least one third-party candidate, if not more than one, that could get some traction. On the other hand, Brett, I just don't see, like, Joe Manchin and Mitt Romney. These are 70-year-old lifetime politicians who, yes, they're moderate. Yes, they offer some degree of centrism, and they both have a lot of experience. But I don't know if that's what independent voters are looking for. They're angry, they're disillusioned, and they're looking for outsiders and people that are going to disrupt the political system. So yeah, like, there's a constituency for Joe Manchin and Romney among good government types, but I really think that not only would they not win, but they probably would risk tipping the votes. They take out more votes away from Joe Biden and probably hand the election to someone like Donald Trump.
In the meantime, Mark, you have the U.S. credit rating, the outlook lowered to negative by Moody's. They're essentially from stable to negative this week as another government shutdown looms. And that is hanging over everything.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, the Republicans are not exactly sending a message of confidence to the voters that you can trust us to run the country. The chaos in the House probably had a lot to do with what happened last Tuesday. But look, I think a unity ticket could actually, no labels ticket could actually have an unusual impact this year, because the problem is that because so many people, the overwhelming majority, don't want a Trump-Biden rematch. But if you're a Republican, you're not going to vote for Biden. He's the worst president of your lifetime. And if you're a Democrat, you're not going to vote for Donald Trump under any circumstance. So you've got a lot of people who don't want this rematch, but they've got no safe harbor to go to. If you had a unit, I don't think Mitt Romney's the right person because he's a never Trumper. But if you had a real unity ticket with Joe Manchin, a centrist, and a real credible Republican vice presidential nominee, or even switch that, I think that would create a safe harbor that a lot of voters might go to. It's unusual. It's a long shot, but it could happen.
You never know. This election's going to be something to watch on all different fronts. We're going to call an audible here and highlight a veteran of your choice. We'll go around the horn really quickly. Leslie?
I'd like to highlight my dad, who fought in the Korean War in the Navy, Richard Marshall Fletcher, and I miss him very much. Sadly, he died at a young age.
Josh?
Yeah, I wanted to pay tribute to three of my grandparents, David Kraushaar, Lawrence Salzberg, and Edna Salzberg, who all served in Europe during World War II and part of the greatest generation that freed the world from fascism.
And Mark?
I'm highlighting my mother, Nina Thiessen, who fought in the Warsaw Uprising, was captured by the Germans when the Warsaw fell, taken to a POW camp, liberated by Patton's army, made her way to America and became an American citizen, the proudest American you ever met.
I think that was worth the time. Thanks to all the veterans, past and present, for serving. And thank you, panel. Have a great weekend.